online. My name is James Stapleton, and I'm the Director of Communications and Public Awareness at CGIAR's International Potato Center. And I'm your moderator for today's event. So first, I'd like to say thanks to everybody for joining for today's event that's been organized by CGIAR and the Farm Journal Foundation. And a particular thanks to AIM4C, particularly to Jamie Adams of USDA for making this event possible today. I'd just like to maybe focus a couple of minutes. Adaptation. For many farmers around the world, there are only 8 seasons left before the 2030 targets, and climate adaptation is really, really crucial for all of them. So today's, what's happening today with food crisis, multiple food crises around the world, a lot of it can be linked back to the tools for farmers to build resilience. So what we're going to do today is a lot of the initiatives today will really focus in on how can we build farmer resilience, how can we adapt to climate change, and also how can we help mitigate climate change with low emissions, long-term low emissions development. For those of you who don't know who CGIAR is the largest publicly funded agricultural network. We provide evidence to policymakers, innovation to partners, and new tools to harness economic, social, and nutritional power of agriculture and food systems. CGIAR is the AIM4C climate knowledge partner and is leading the innovation sprint on fast-tracking climate solutions for germplasm banks in partnership with the Foundation for Food and Agriculture and the Gates Foundation. The aim of today's event is to present CGIAR and its climate initiatives together with its partners, and to talk about how we can explore how we can tackle today's complex challenges, focusing on the areas where research and innovation will have the most impact. So before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to call on Rob Bertram, the Chief Scientist in USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, to say a few words. Rob, please. It seems that we have temporarily lost Rob Bertram. So you know what? I'm going to move on, and if Rob is able to come back, maybe he could say a few words later on in the event. So we have 5 speakers, 5 scientists here to talk about their initiatives and what could become innovation sprints. We have Ana Maria Lobaguero, who's the climate director at the Alliance of Biodiversity and SIAT. We have Maha Alzoubi, researcher, agricultural water solutions at the International Water Management Institute. Rob, we had lost you there. I was going to pass over to you to say a few opening remarks. I think I'd like to go back. I haven't gone very far into the introductions. Rob, you're still on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay, great. I'm sorry, I had the wrong link, I think, but it's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to start by thanking you and all your CGIAR colleagues, the Farm Journal Foundation, Ann Vaughn and Jamie Adams, and our climate lead in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, and Jamie are guiding our efforts in the AIM4C overall. And I'm especially excited to be here today in an ideation event. I have to say, I don't want to steal your thunder, James, but I looked at the list of speakers, and it's really a who's who of people, thought leaders across the CGIAR, and people in our partner countries and organizations across a spectrum of interested disciplines and expertise. So really looking forward to a great session this morning. And so our title, I think you know, is Transforming Food, Land, and Water Systems to Ensure Food and Nutrition Security in a Climate Crisis. So right now, I think all of us realize that with the war in Ukraine and the attack from Russia on Ukraine, the world has once again focused on food security issues. However, frankly, I remember, I think February 2nd or so, the New York Times had an article that talked about the food and fuel price crisis that was emerging. And this was before the invasion. So while we have a bright spotlight on the immediate effects and food insecurity and the disruptions that high prices are causing across the food system, and especially to low-income people in developing countries, in poorer countries in particular, we can't take our eyes off the fact that there is a larger existential crisis that we faced and that President Biden has referred to as the climate crisis. And I think we know that even without the war, for example, in the Horn of Africa, some 20 million people would have required food assistance this year. And that's partly because of climate. It's also partly because of conflict. But we know, and I think there's people in our session today who understand the linkages between those two issues. So there's a lot of bad news out there right now, and we must necessarily turn our attention to mitigating the effects of those immediate impacts on food security and hunger and malnutrition. But that doesn't mean we can take our eye off the prize of continuing to invest in new solutions. It would be, in fact, it would be a terrible mistake were we to do so. And fortunately, a lot of what we're going to hear about this morning in terms of solutions that are available, they're because of past investments and present investments, but also past investments in R&D and the partnerships that knit together CGIAR researchers, innovation lab researchers from our US universities, and national and local partners all around the world, many other scientists, North and South, working together to generate solutions. So we are in Feed the Future are fortunate to have this array of solutions available to us. But the point, I think, for us today is that we can't take our attention off meeting the needs, not just of today, but of the future. And that's really what the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate is all about. And so a few more points about AIM4C. It was launched at COP26 by the United States and the United Arab Emirates. Over 40 countries and 200 private sector and NGO partners have joined this effort that seeks to address climate change and global hunger by uniting participants to significantly increase investment in and support for climate smart agriculture and food systems over 5 years. We've had impressive successes so far. At COP26, commitments to AIM4C reached over $4 billion, and the US government alone committed $1 billion over 5 years, which includes, I might add, a major part of our CGIAR funding and also our innovation lab efforts that address climate smart food systems. So there's a proven track record to generating impacts that make a difference for farmers around the world. I talked to Dr. Prasanna recently at CIMMYT, one part of the One CGIAR, and just this year, 4 million additional acres of drought-tolerant maize are being planted. This is a result of long research efforts funded by USAID, the Gates Foundation, and many other CGIAR partners. We have heat-tolerant varieties coming up. We have the integration of perennials and legumes in systems. We have climate-smart livestock approaches. Water resource management is another key area we're going to hear about this morning, because so often the key for adaptation, and the key not just to adaptation but to better livelihoods, has to do with water. So today's ideation event is a great opportunity to get more commitments and tangible actions and investments towards climate smart food systems. AIM4C is looking to engage governments, non-government organizations, the private sector, research universities, national partners to catalyze, and civil society groups to catalyze greater investment and support for agricultural innovation and research and development. Our hope, thus, James and colleagues, is that AIM for Climate partners will mobilize new investment targeted in the billions of dollars in climate smart agricultural research and development innovation, and create incentives and mechanisms for maximizing the impact for positive outcomes amid a changing climate. And we know we've got a lot of successes to point to, and shining a light on those successes, as our speakers are going to do today, I'm sure, is part of how we continue to attract those resources that position us and our partner countries and people around the globe working towards these ends to continue to get the support we need to deliver. So after today's event and hearing from our panelists, I'd like to urge all of you to consider reaching out to your partners, old and new, to explore creating an innovation sprint. I could say more about this because I'm thinking about several myself, but today is the day we want to hear up from others and also spur others to put on their thinking caps around things that could generate excitement and support as we generate together new solutions for climate, both adaptation, but also mitigation. So with all of that, James, I'll turn it back to you, and I wish you all a great session this morning. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Thanks a lot for those words. I would like to pull out a couple of things, underlining the need to excite people and that this is a long-term endeavor. And if we want to be able to have the resilience to respond to the next challenges that come along, then we need to be investing today to mitigate and help people adapt. So over to the speakers, we have Ana Maria Lobo-Guerrero, the Climate Director at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CGIAR, and she'll talk about her initiative, ClimeBear. Maha Al-Zubi, researcher for the Agricultural Water Solutions at the International Water Management Institute. Santosh Napal, the Water Resources and Climate researcher, also at the International Water Management Institute. He will talk about Nexus Gains. Polly Erickson, the program leader of Sustainable Livestock Systems at the International Livestock Research Institute, and she will talk about livestock climate and systems resilience. And lastly, Lou Verscholl, principal scientist and the leader of the Land Restoration Group of the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CGIAR, and he will talk about Mitigate Plus. So I won't go into these, I'm going to leave that to the researchers. So over to you, Ana Maria, to talk about ClimeBear.
Thank you very much, James. And before I get to talk about ClimeBear, let me start by just providing a little bit of an overview of what the One CGIAR portfolio intends to achieve in terms of both climate adaptation and mitigation. If you could go to the following slide, please. So we are aiming at three very simple, straightforward objectives through the implementation of our projects in the following decade. The first one deals specifically with policies, strategies, and it's that we would like to contribute through our research to implement national adaptation plans and national determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. The second objective, it's very much related to reaching people, reaching small-scale producers. We want to contribute through equip 500 million small-scale producers to be more climate resilient to climate shocks. But very important, the way that we are going to do this, it's by working with national innovation systems, co-generating these climate adaptation solutions. The third objective, it's in relation to mitigation. We want to contribute to turn agriculture and forest systems into a net sink for carbon by 2050. This means contributing to reducing emissions from agriculture by 1 gigaton per year by 2030 and reaching a floor of 5 gigatons per year by 2050. So how are we going to reach these objectives? So let me present this initiative. This initiative is dealing specifically with resilience, so the adaptation side of the story. If you could go to the following slide. So the name of this initiative is ClimeBear, and what ClimeBear aims is to transform the climate adaptation capacity of food, land, and water systems in Guatemala, Kenya, Morocco, the Philippines, Senegal, and Zambia, and through these, to contribute to increase the resilience of smallholder production systems to respond to severe climate change effects like drought, flooding, and high temperatures. we are aiming at achieving three simple outcomes by the end of the project. The first one is in terms of reaching people. So we want to be able to reach more than 300,000 vulnerable farmers with our innovations. The second one, it's very much related, the second outcome very much related to policies and investments. So we want to contribute through shaping at least 9 policies or investments that are aiming and strengthening the agricultural resilience. But also, and Rob mentioned this idea of understanding this nexus between risks, conflict, peace building, and agriculture. So also aiming to inform those decisions. And the third outcome is in relation to money. So through our work, we want to contribute to mobilize more than $30 million in new investments to be able to build this resilience. At the heart of what we are doing in Climber are partnerships. As Rob was mentioning, we are not going to be able to achieve these outcomes without partners. More than 130 partners are involved into developing this agenda. You could go to the following slide, please. So how we are going to do this in terms of themes? We are going to be working through 4 work packages and 2 cross-cutting themes. The first one, it's in relation to reducing risks for producers' livelihoods and in value chains. This is focusing on digital tools, on climate information services. The second one, it's in relation to climate security. So really using our science to understand the relationship between climate, security, conflict, and identifying paths to climate resilient peace. The third work package is in relation to policy pathways. So it's making sure that policymakers have the right information, the right tools to develop holistic and coherent specific policies, considering context to build this resilience. The fourth work package deals with governance. We believe that without governance, we're never going to be able to build this systemic resilience. So this has a big focus on capacity building, on developing the right tools to enable governance for resilience, considering local, national, regional, and global levels. Gender and social equity and climate finance are going to be cross-cutting all the activities happening through these work packages. If you could go to my last slide. So just to give you a little bit of the flavor of the innovations that we are already starting to develop. First one, it's considering this bundle of different dimensions in terms of gender differentiated insurance products that are really ready for scaling, for reaching many, many farmers. The second innovation, it's in relation to climate. This climate security observatory, which is a decision support tool to qualify and quantify this nexus between climate security and agriculture in order to inform decisions and targets. And then this third innovation, it's this platform which puts together 3 dimensions very important to reducing risks. The first one, it's in relation to early warning. The second dimension, early action. And the third dimension, early finance. And the idea is that through this platform, we can contribute to respond in an effective way to these risks, therefore building resilience for vulnerable populations. So let me introduce Maha. Maha is going to continue talking about resilience, in this case, going from a fragility to resilience dimension in the Central and West Asia and North Africa region. So go ahead, Maha.
Thank you so much, Anna. Moving to Siwana region, as most of you know, that it's experiencing many challenges among it's the lack of productive agricultural land, severe water scarcity, and unsustainable surface and groundwater abstraction, particularly for agricultural purposes, and the semi-arid and aridness that will become more extreme with ongoing climate change. So this initiative been actually designed in full consultation with partners to ensure it's demand-driven to build resilient agri-food system in the region, considering the impact of climate change to generate a better livelihood for rural communities. In the first 3 years, the initiative has 5 planned regional anchor countries: Egypt, Lebanon, Morocco, Uzbekistan, Sudan, representing diverse needs and social contexts. Next slide, please. So to address the challenge that been identified in the design phase, so the initiative through 4 thematic work packages and 1 cross-cutting will work with partners to be implemented. So the first work package, which is cross-cutting innovations in partnerships, policies, and platforms for agri-food systems transformation. The second work package, genetic innovations, seed systems, and agrobiodiversity conservation. The third one, sustainable intensification of farming systems. The fourth one, integrated food, land, water, and energy systems. And the fifth work package is scaling innovation and digital tools. Next slide, please. So to address the agricultural resilience challenge in Tijuana, the initiative will work with partners to test, validate, and upscale 9 innovations in the coming 3 years. And the scaling digital innovation to build the climate resilient agriculture value chains will follow 3 steps. First, assess the value chain risk identification, social impact for resilient farming. The second step will be accelerate through innovation, digital solution for enhancing value chain resilience. And the third one, accelerating adaptive strategies and promoting entrepreneurship for resilience value chains. So now I will give just like quickly 2 examples of innovation that the initiative will implement. First one, weather station-based irrigation and advisory system, moving from traditional irrigation system for more ET-based irrigation. And we have a good example from Uzbekistan, switching from Soviet-era irrigation scheduling method to ICARDA's smart system that was on average 32 saving of irrigation water and 50% increase in water productivity. And the second slide, please. It's farm to basin smart tools for water efficiency and management, remote sensing, digital extension services, where we have a good experience from Ini's work in Egypt and Lebanon, designing and developing mobile application to help farmers and extension services for a better water irrigation scheduling and management at farm level. By this, I'm ending my presentation. And next slide, my colleague Stefan, talking about Nexus.
Thank you, Maha.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Santosh Nepal. I'm presenting on behalf of Stefan, the lead. The Nexus game aims to improve integrated management of water, energy, food ecosystem for inclusive and sustainable development of transboundary river basin, and that's also in the context of climate change. Therefore, it considers a broad range of actors and stakeholders to overcome disciplinary and administrative silos. Next slide, please. So Nexus game focus. Okay, next slide, please. Nexus game focuses on 5 major transboundary river basin, as you can see in the graph. Ganges and Indus, which is also considered as the South Asia's bread and basket. Blue Nile Basin in Ethiopia and Sudan, where rapidly growing population faces increasing food and nutrition insecurity from climate change. Aral Sea, the whole basin, but more prospective from the Uzbekistan, and Limpopo in South Africa. And all these river basins have strong upstream downstream linkages. So what happens in the upstream areas, be it like anthropogenic or natural processes, affect the downstream, both in terms of supply and demand. And the complexities actually increases with the transboundary basins. So quantification and accounting of water, energy, food ecosystem resources are very critical, and which can create shared benefits and trade-off across the countries. So all these focal basins are actually a global hotspot for multi-sectoral risk from climate change and other socioeconomic changes. Next slide, please. Take an example of the Indus basins. The Indus is the most vulnerable and most critical basin in the world in South Asia. So Indus discharge actually consists of more than 60-70% of water originating from the mountain, snow and glacier melts. So especially in the spring season, the pre-monsoon season, up to 60% of total irrigation withdrawal actually originate from mountain, snow and glacier melt. And it actually contributes to additional 11% in total crop production. So the meltwater, the snow and glacier meltwater actually buffers pre-monsoon drought in both Indus and Ganges. The next page. So this is just published last week. So here we looked at the climate change perspective on the impact on the food production, and this one is example from the Indus. So here what you see is that the global warming actually causes glacier to start melting earlier in the year, which you can see in the upper graph. So 1 or 2 months earlier melt, and this is just when crops are being sown. So this is favorable. But in the later year, when the crop needs most water, that means you can see in the Kharif season, there is less meltwater. So climate change also makes more, erratic rainfall. So too much and too little rainfall kind of thing. So farmers have to pump more groundwater later in the year in the Kharif season, where you see in the lower graph, there is a higher irrigation demand. So to meet that irrigation demand, the farmer needs to pump more water. And the effect is exaggerated by expanding farmland in the future to feed more people. So in Indus, the present population is 206 million, and that will be 50% increase in population. But as well as the GDP is projected to increase by 8-fold. So that means that more socioeconomic activities, more people, more demand of water. So therefore, a lot of extra groundwater has to be pumped, more than can be replenished. And this is not sustainable in the long. So this was the challenging situations of managing water, energy, food, ecosystems in the changing climate situations. Next slide, please. The last one. Okay, to address these challenges in a transboundary river basin, Nexus Gains provides in-depth understanding of climate change impact on future water availability and other water, energy, food ecosystem resources. And we multi-stakeholders will utilize tools and approaches to improve water productivity. And we also aim to develop the gender-sensitive business models to scale up rural energy and other governance toolbox to address the growing competition. And particularly, we will develop Nexus Women Champions as a part of the very dedicated capacity building activities. And all these activities will consist of innovations that includes the inclusive business models, decision support system, cross-sectoral platforms and leadership, which will support policymakers and planners and other welfare researchers. Thank you. Now I'll pass to livestock climate and resilience systems, Polly Erickson. Thank you.
Thank you, Santosh. Thanks very much. Good day, everybody. I'm Polly Erickson, and I will be talking about a brand new initiative, livestock climate and system resilience. If I could have the next slide, please. So I'd like to present this initiative as an innovation. Because it's the first time that we've been able to have an initiative that is looking principally at livestock, and as you will see, looking at livestock both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So you may ask why an initiative that focuses on livestock? And so here are just a few facts that set up that the rationale. So there are over 1 billion people who depend on livestock for livelihoods and nutrition, and they face multiple climate hazards, some of which are mapped in the diagram on the slide. Sadly, we know that 14.5 roughly % of total annual greenhouse gas emissions are derived from livestock, and that's an agenda that we've really had to concentrate on within the 1CG. And the ag development community. But 74 countries, at least, and I think this number has recently gone up, have identified livestock as a mitigation priority in their nationally determined contributions. And sadly, a fraction of climate investment is allocated to livestock systems research or development. Next slide, please. So we would like to argue that the Livestock Climate and System Resilience Initiative presents a unique niche and a comparative advantage to produce both outcomes and impact. So first, we are very demand driven. We are responding to demand for information and tools to implement those NDCs, to implement the nationally appropriate mitigation actions or other climate finance, and to report on countries' progress towards both their adaptation and their mitigation targets. We are ready for action. We are building on research innovations and impact partners in Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Colombia, Mali, Senegal, and Guatemala. And then we are part of this growing portfolio of climate initiatives that the 1CG is implementing, in particular, Climate and Mitigate Plus. But because we are focusing on livestock, we are inherently always talking about adaptation interventions and their mitigation co-benefits, which is really exciting. And then we are centered on climate action, SDG 13, and we hope that over the 10 years of the proposed 10 years of this initiative, that 100% of approximately 10 million beneficiaries are receiving, using, adapting, modifying, and working with CGIAR innovations. Next slide, please. So we will deliver these outcomes using a range of innovations. As with the other initiatives, we are organized into work packages, and these work packages sort of go up in scale. The first work package focuses on strengthening household capacities. We hope to reach about 350,000 households. And some of the innovations are adaptation pioneers, farmers who are already leading the way on-farm greenhouse gas emissions testing. The second work package is reducing climate risk with digital services. We hope to reach around 500,000 livestock value chain actors. And again, some of the innovations are the bundling of climate information services with climate smart ag practices, drought risk finance, and a real focus on gender and youth inclusion. The third work package we call leveraging landscapes. We hope to be implementing governance and restoration practices across 500,000 hectares. And again, some of the innovations are participatory rangeland management, landscape level governance, and landscape level trade-off analysis. Our fourth and really important work package is financing the transition to a climate resilient livestock systems. We hope to attract $50 million worth of investment. And some of the innovations here are developing key performance indicators and generating better evidence on the returns to livestock investments. And then last but not least, working with the policy environment, hoping to influence 5 policies. And again, some of the innovations are improving monitoring, reporting, and verification protocols, adaptation tracking protocols, and advocacy both for livestock and rangelands. And with that, I am finished, and I will now turn this over to Lou Verchot to talk about Mitigate Plus. Thanks for your time and attention.
Thanks, Polly. I'm pleased to talk with everybody and share our ideas around mitigation research and research for low emissions food system development in the 1CGIAR. Next slide, please. So just to set the context a little bit, we know that the global food system is large and that it provides critical food, nutritional security, and livelihoods and socioeconomic benefits. At the same time, we know that it generates externalities that create increased burdens on the public sector, that constrain sustainable development, that exacerbate poverty. We know that a large percentage of agricultural soils are degraded worldwide. Agriculture is rapidly overpumping aquifers in many parts of the world and getting close to fully pumping aquifers in other parts of the world. A large portion of biodiversity loss is attributable to food production, and there's a large pressure on commercial fishing and on fish stocks worldwide. But the externality that we're really trying to address in this initiative is that food systems produce between 21 and 37% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that 72% of these emissions come from the global south. Next slide, please. And so we're trying to work through this initiative in a manner that's consistent with the Paris Agreement. We think that mitigation needs to be set within a development context, and we're really focused on low emissions food system development in a manner that does not threaten food production. And that's language that's taken directly from paragraph 2 of or article 2 of the Paris Agreement. And we're looking at providing information, tools, and data for informed decision-making for effective and equitable design and implementation of food system actions aimed at low emissions development. Next slide, please. So we're looking at a transformational approach that has a strong reliance on political economy. and trying to focus on system transformation in ways that integrate gender and inclusion across the initiative, taking into account the institutional context, taking into account finance needs, and we're looking at building on CGIAR experience over the past 25 years to develop several new innovations focused on developing planning frameworks for climate food system climate change interventions. The idea here is that food systems are typically not a way that ministries are organized, that programs and projects are organized. It's a new approach, and we're looking at developing some innovations to assist with the planning of interventions in this area. We're looking at adapting our approaches to food systems to align with greenhouse gas inventory frameworks and to help improve the ways that the climate benefits of food systems actions are accounted for and reported internationally and nationally, so that impact can be attributed with confidence. We're looking at socially inclusive decision support tools and frameworks to facilitate equitable implementation, equitable design, because we know that there are trade-offs and often climate mitigation actions do have disproportionate impacts on different segments of society. We want to make those trade-offs apparent ex ante, to facilitate design, but also in real time to be monitoring the equity dimensions of food systems interventions, so that adaptive management can be put in place, so that that negative impacts can be addressed early. We're looking at scaling and scaling readiness, and really trying to facilitate the enabling environment. And so, as I said earlier, we're looking at the current institutional context and the constraints, the institutional constraints to low emissions food system development, but also what can be done to overcome those constraints. We're looking at finance issues. We're looking at the broader context to creating enabling environments. And finally, we want to facilitate national reporting to the Climate Change Convention. Food systems, low emissions food system development actions are prominent in a number of nationally determined contributions. And the reporting of these is often lagging both in time and in detail, so that improving these should facilitate better participation of our target countries in the Climate Change Convention and begin to hopefully open up some of the constraints that there are currently to mobilizing finance and resource allocation to these initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Lou. A really interesting selection of tools and initiatives across the food system, for digital tools for understanding climate and being able to plan and plant, assistance to policymakers, making sure that they're gender inclusive, and so. And you're aware of the trade-offs. So look, now we have a really exciting panel, 4 experts. I'd like to introduce them to a couple of questions, and then at the end of their questions, there'll be questions from you. If you could send your questions in the chat. We've got Bernard Kimuro, the livestock climate change specialist at the State Department of Livestock in Kenya. Usman Nidia, director of the Meteorological Office in Senegal. Susil Chandra Akarya, Director General of the Department of Water Resources and Irrigation, under the Ministry of Energy, Water Resources, Irrigation in Kathmandu. And lastly, Michiko Katagami, the Principal Natural Resources and Agricultural Specialist, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of the Asian Development Bank. So really interesting conversation we're looking forward to. So let's start off with Bernard. Bernard, the aim for SEA is a partnership between the US and the United Arab Emirates. Is international cooperation more important now in terms of climate change solutions? Bernard? So it looks as if we've temporarily lost Bernard. So I'm going to go to you, Michiko, with the same question.
Hi, just filling in for the burnout. Now, of course, an international collaboration is just a fundamental assumption. I think we heard that ERI expert talking about the transboundary water issues, and then without international cooperation, you can't really even studying all those issues and then consultation. And at our investment level, the climate investment, both adaptation and mitigation, we often find that most of the effective solution is always found at the regional level, not really at the country level, landscape level. For example, unfortunately, we haven't really done anything, but we just benefiting that is the CG centers. And I think ERI has started this, the Sea Trade Initiative, regional trade, to avail the climate resilient varieties in the hands of the farmers within the short period of time. With this new scheme of the seed, the regional trade, it's that what it does is I always thought it's a 6 months or the less months spent for this natural release procedure compared to what is common in an Asian involved member countries. It takes 3 years, sometimes 5 years to make that all the already available species, but until the time frame gap between development and also this actual and made it available in the forms of seed, it takes years. And at the livestock value chain investment level, for example, we always try to formulate a regional level. We have an ongoing one at the livestock sustainable livestock value chain in the Mekong sub-regional region. What it is the ASEAN countries plus the southern states of the China, and that in the sort of basically to scale and adaptation and the mitigation solution, a whole value chain in the livestock that deal with these animal health issues, food safety issues, and all this and environmental sustainability, and all those externalities is best addressed at the larger sort of, if it's not global, it's a regional issue. So that's what we see the importance of the regional cooperation, of course, and knowledge sharing. All this that among the nation who's facing that similar kind of challenges that we often starting doing this a lot of adaptation, climate resilience building initiatives in small state islands nations, and they face all the same kind of problems. Solutions are a little bit diversified, but it's the sharing experience of this that addressing the same issues is really, really helpful. So it's the cross-feeding at the regional cooperation is very important, I think. Thank you.
That's really interesting. I guess what you're really saying here is that climate change doesn't respect borders, and I think that's a really important point for people to go through. Maybe if I could turn to Osman Nidira, the Director of Meteorological Office in Senegal. Osman, what type of climate service innovations are needed for climate information to reach the millions of small-scale farmers affected by climate change?
Thanks very much. I think yes, we need to done a few things. We have to recognize we have done a lot in terms of data management, in terms of modeling and technology, but we need a little things to ensure that our success at a local level can be replicated at the big level. What is missing is, I think we should be more demand driven. Going from large scale needs sometimes to rethink about our problem, to be more problem focused because problems are changing. One also challenges is also to give more voice in the farmers, people at a local level, in terms of designing, for example, our process, to tailor more the climate information, and also to do what we call co-production. Sometimes something is done somewhere and we just transfer it without thinking of, we have new people, new challenging and everything. One also important thing is to ensure that local people have also see an added value. I can give you an example. We was building a public-private partnership, and we are ensuring that any farmers organizations they get in are also partner, and they get some kind of percentage of the added value somehow. That's very important. Also, we ensure that we use the right, technologies, the right communication channels from places to place. We have many. We have text messaging, social network, community radio, and also one important thing is also to ensure that governmental, institutions are involved. I know sometimes it's very difficult because of the bureaucracy and the way that they work, but if you want to make it sustainable, we need to go through those, sustainable organizations that their mandate is always to do that. Sometimes very difficult, but I think we should more and more to get involved in that. And also to ensure that the private sector is also part of it. Sometimes the private sector can take it to the next level because they see the marketable, values, and sometimes they make it very, very easy because they have another eyes of seeing things. So we ensure that in delivering the climate information, public-private also are involved. And lastly, also to ensure that it's cross or multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, however you call it, ensuring that all partners are also taking care of it. Sometimes you go in one scale, you can see that some partners are present. You go to another scale, you want the same partners, and sometimes the problem is completely changing. So you ensure that you make it flexible, that everywhere you go, and partners, new partners, current partners are also a part of it. So to resume myself, it's important to make it demand-driven. It already said, to also get users more and more place, not to give them the users. I don't prefer the terms users. They are just partners on this thing. They have their voice, they have their need, and sometimes you design your project somewhere, make a pilot somewhere, and want to transfer it in another platform. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Usman. That's really interesting. So basically what you're saying is bringing in people from across disciplines and make sure that we're not supply driven, make sure that we're responding to the needs and those with that response as it changes. I'd like to move on to Cecile. Cecile, if I could maybe put the same question to you, I think that would be really interesting. Get a perspective from another part of the world, as Usman says, with a different set of eyes.
Thank you. The agriculture and food system is one of the sectors which are hardly hit by climate change. Climate change in the form of gradual increase in temperature and erratic rainfall is impacting agricultural productions. Nepal has observed many different peculiar instances such as early flowering, tree line shifting, and more crop stress situations due to water stress and drought. Despite Nepal is rich in water resources, but the distribution of the water resources is not as per requirement in terms of times and place. So when the plant water stress is high, there is no water, and when during the monsoon seasons, a lot of rainfall occurs. At the time, plant stress is less. Likewise, due to the topographic situations, the place where water is available, they're not sufficient farmland, but the large part of the farmland have scarce water resources. So we need to develop a water resource project, and water resource management have to focus as mentioned by Rob. So climate extremes are rising in the nowadays, which is affecting agriculture and food systems. Like extreme events, heavy rainfall, hot day, wet and dry spells are all impacting our systems. Because of this, we are more prone to much and to little water. So as solutions, we have to focus on providing climate-related information across different scales, from national scales to small landholders. Information related to weather forecast is very crucial for local and small-scale farmers. Based on this forecast information, farmers can take proper crop calendar, proper crop management actions, as mentioned by Anna Mary, after knowing the weather forecasting situation, early warning, early actions, and early finance seems more relevant in the context of small farmers of the Nepal. Similarly, use of climate sensitive tools and techniques are very important. Approach like climate resilience, water resource like small scale lifting system or solar lifting system, utilizations of the groundwater. Groundwater have plenty of possibility in the context of the Nepal, and which is yet to exploit. Below the 20% of the groundwater potential have been utilized so far. So we have a lot of possibilities. And another context is Nepal's geology is very fragile, and
Cecile, I just want to maybe go through another couple of questions, and I'll come back to you maybe on a second question where I'm just got my eye on the clock. If you maybe just finish off the concept of your briefly what you were saying. Thank you.
Innovation. Okay. For the watershed conservation, also equally important to make small farmland more fertile, because every year disasters have taken place due to the fragile geology, and farmers are losing their farmland fertility, productivity. So agricultural management systems have to change. The traditional agricultural management systems have to change to cope with the climate change scenario, and food habit have to be changed, and action, research action have to taken place forcing these problems due to the climate change and prevalent problems of the farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecile. If I could maybe turn the question to Michiko as well with the same question. As Osman was saying at the beginning, with a different perspective, from the perspective of the bank and the investments that are needed. Michiko, please.
So this is about the innovation for the scaling questions, right?
Yes.
Okay. What we have seen for we're in the business of the upscaling of the promising small sort of like proven on the ground solutions, and then we try to put it in the more like a larger scalable investment. The scale we're talking about is not just the 100,000, but it's starting with 10,000 or trying to lead into the 500,000 or something that with a bit ambition. So for that kind of scaling, climate information sharing that we have been doing in Pakistan and Bangladesh, there's one key thing. One thing is just to try to get the many of the farmers believe in this information and change their behavior. And there's certain things that is a trust that depends on the partner organization that work with. That's another one. So the institutional setup is important for the scaling. But another thing is about business model. I'll give you a specific example. Irrigation service advisory based on a very, very good precise weather and also the moisture level of the soil information, putting it to very simple text messages. And that has scaled from 4,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 very quickly. And up to 100,000 in Pakistan, moved on to the Bangladesh. And we're looking at the 1 million farmers now. Now, what gets in the problem here is that the public sector cannot really provide all the services. Generational advisory is okay, but just texting the 1 million farmers every week, that costs you. So you have to introduce something about the fee collection. For example, $1 a year from 1 million farmers, that would generate 1 million, and that's going to cover most of the cost. Or just to tolerate some of the fund sponsors or the advertisement just goes together with your messages. How effective that is, but it's a different kind of business models issue is going to be the common challenge that we always see, and that's the fundamentals of the threshold is if you want to go into 1 million from a little lower level. So that's what we found as a important challenge. Thank you.
That's super interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to maybe go back to Osman. Osman, in terms of capacity building, what is needed? No, excuse me, sorry. Many climate initiatives fail to scale. What do you see as the role of research in contributing to reaching the scale needed to deliver on the SDGs?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, the question should be reframed as, the challenge is going from piloting to scaling up. I mean, we think that when we do something in a given place, it will be very easy to make it, go everywhere. And there are quite big challenges. One thing is each country have its own specificity. And you go to another side, you need to take into consideration. For example, the social dimension, which is very important, the customs, language barrier, challenges also are different. Climate shocks also are completely different. I mean, the most prominent climate shocks, I mean, from sometimes farming is one problem, in another area livestock, in another problem health, in another problem flooding, so and so forth. So we need really to think more holistically, when we go to the scaling up. I mean, I like this idea of one CG or one health, just kind of thinking everything is together and having this holistic approach for that. Also, I would like, we could have go from top down to bottom up. What I mean is, sometimes you make it work in a pilot, you say, okay, let's replicate it somewhere, but you could have done that as well. We have done it here. It works very fine. Let's go to another place, but let's present to farmers what they have done. And in light of that, let them propose us what is the best solution in their thing. Changing the thinking, and then use a team that have already the experience there to accompany them and to help them, and etc. So we need really a change of paradigm. For example, we learn in our what you call our success stories, and we don't learn or document our errors. Sometimes you do piloting, there are many errors that at the end you build up that and you have a success. But when you try to pilot, you don't bring up just that experience of error and to change things. So we need this paradigm of thinking when we go to upscaling, ensuring that those errors that we are building upon that. Instead of saying, okay, we have a success, let's make this success work in this area. Those are the challenges that we need really to face in order to ensure that when we do something right in one place, we can do it, in another place by bringing all those specificity and making also the population in front.
Thank you, Osman. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's what Michiko was referring to when she was talking about making it sustainable. We have a lot of projects that haven't been sustainable. And if we were learning from our errors, then sustainability, financial sustainability would have been built in. And let me take me back to Cecile. Cecile, in terms of capacity building, what do you see is needed to empower farmers and other food systems actors so they can use climate information for decision making?
Yeah, agro-advisory is very important for the farmers for sustainable growth and making climate resilience production. Due to the lack of crucial information regarding crop management, irrigation, timing, crop health, moisture condition can lead to the decrease in agricultural productivity. So farmers' capacity is very important to make the decisive role in the value chain of agriculture system. We also need to look the marginalized community, small-scale farmers, women, disadvantaged groups, to have attention for making them capable to receive and to use such informations. So, so especially we have to focus on, in the context of the Nepal, information dissemination and capability of utilization of such informations. And applying such informations for the value chain of the agriculture system is important in the context of the Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecile. And I've got a question coming in here from Laura in the audience, who said she'd be really interested in hearing some examples of learning from failures. Usman, you raised that as an issue. It would be very interesting if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more about that, and maybe then to our other two speakers if they'd like to comment.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. One example is just indigenous knowledge. When we was doing the upscaling, of climate forecast, we thought that we have the best forecast because we have the Met services and we have the science. But when we arrive in the community level, we need that they have indigenous knowledge how to make their forecast using different things. But it was not documented. So we try to, show them what we can do and how they use it. But when we understood that there was a big error, so we should have built upon what they have done. Using, for example, examples they use. For example, they use the change in the environment and telling them that the techniques that we use, the appareil, etc., are the same. They just allow us to make a measurement now. Things have changed, so and so forth. So we have learned a lot with them. So what I'm saying is just when you come and all those failures that you make, usually you don't document it. At the end, it's really gone. So those things are really important when you go somewhere else, not to repeat those kind of error.
Thanks a lot, Usman. Would Michiko or Susil like to come in? Michiko, thanks.
If I may, just briefly,
Yeah,
this
sure.
is not so much about the failure, but it's, for example, the well-known, this AWD for this climate smart solution. We brought in and tried to test it with the farmers in Bangladesh. And then we often assume that everybody's understood the logic of this. But the first thing that we hear is like, why on earth are you coming to why are you forcing me to continue cultivation of rice? It doesn't make much of this, see, there's a gap between what we understand from the scientific studies and what is right for the climate. Doesn't necessarily focus on the center of this light focus of many of the farmers. We often feel the gap when you try to do this trial, try to evaluate for the scaling. So that's a normal sort of the procedure of the business process for us. But we often get surprised to get the feedback, and it's just a long. So it's. I think we would have to do a little bit more like a research mind, but also we have to go back and forth with this stakeholders sort of a feedback brought into this, and that's sort of like often the constant feedback that we always get it wrong for the first time. So we always go back and forth. Real labor intensive, but it's very important procedures that at least for the beginning of this, introducing something new. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michiko. And it's really quite heartening that a lot of the initiatives that we have presented today have this concept of multi-stakeholder platforms and engagement with partners. Cecile, would you like to come in on this question, or maybe should move on? This concept of learning from failure.
Yeah, concept of learning of failure. Like in the past, indigenous knowledge, indigenous technology was utilized in Nepal by different indigenous groups. But the indigenous knowledge and indigenous technology systems was very relevant at that time. And due to the change of the climate change, different scenario, the change context of water resources and other social change context, I think new research, scientific solutions we have to explore, and indigenous knowledge and capacity should be modified in the context of the new circumstances as recommended by scientific knowledge, research, and recommendations, as per my understanding. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Cecile. I have a couple of questions in here from Brady and from Gabriella, and if you'll allow me to take two. Would we benefit from careful assessments of poverty reduction approaches of China, India, and the US? And then a second one from Gabriella. Do you believe that the food security challenges posed by climate change will be mostly addressed by scientific innovation or policy? So I throw either of those questions out to our three speakers.
I can answer the second one. I think both are important. For example, if you go to some countries, where the system is heavily, top to down, where the government is setting everything, even farmers to get, seeds or to get fertilizer, it needs to go to the government. There is nothing, the private is not developed. You ensure that policy is very important, and to convince people at the higher level. You want to ensure that where is the decision system? Who is taking the decision? We really have the decision, and then you start with discussing with them, and then little by little you try to have everybody on board. Technology is very important. You always need to have it on your board to solve some problems, but really the decision system is much more complicated than that, and it varies from country to country. In some countries, the decision is taken by the central government. In some countries, the farmers are very important and very powerful. If you just enhance capacity to them, you can achieve a lot of things.
Thanks a lot, Usman. And would either of our other two speakers like Michiko, please?
Maybe just following up to Osman's point, if it's important just the science that you can't choose, you have to do both. And then plus I would add, efforts to bring in investment into this to follow and implement the scientific recommendations. This is what we see that our role is. And that's why we're increasingly working with as many of the CG Center scientists and also beyond. I mean, you have to get it right first time in terms of the scientific evidence. And it's a moving target. It's a dynamic problem that we're dealing with here. Is adaptation is in our region. It's just so what we have believed a year ago, it is so really changing. And then also not just for the climate point of view, but also the dynamics of the economies that is growing, and also depending on the type of the institution that we're going to work with. So, so science evidence is important. And then the granular details of this, the recommendation based on scientific research, can be interpreted into investment. That's our job in sort of the first stage of the upscaling. And to make the investment happen, there has to be a lot of reform that has to take place with these environmental sort of sustainability supporting policy agendas. And in our member countries, there's so many things, well-intended policy subsidies that it gets in the way of adaptation. So I think that's something that is all of the three elements is really critical, I would say.
Thanks a lot, Michiko. And I have Ana Maria Lobaguiero. Ana Maria.
Thank you very much, James, because I think that this is a really interesting question. And this is something that we are addressing through this set of projects in the One CGIAR. And it's about this enabling environment. So we have learned that the technologies and the science behind the technologies is not enough to address these questions that you were mentioning in terms of being able to scale, reach the millions that we need to reach. And therefore, what we are proposing through this portfolio of initiatives of the One CGIAR, it's really being able to address these bundles, if you could say so, or you could use different words. But it's how the technology that we have been developing, the science, it's combined with those policies that need to be in place so that they provide the right incentives for the uptake of these technologies, but also is thinking about capacity building. If we don't empower farmers to really be able to use these innovations, then the resilience is never going to be built. So the idea of these packages, I think that it's fundamental if we are serious about this scaling issue. So obviously we need the technologies, but we need to understand how do they interact with policies, with capacity building, with finance. And as Usman said, considering context specificity so that we are able to co-generate these solutions. Just to add that.
Thanks a lot, Ana Maria. So we've got time for one more question. So I'd like our panelists to be super brief. When you scale up solutions across different regions, how do you manage the power relations and build trust when the different stakeholders may not have been involved in the co-creation in the same way as the original research? So maybe Usman, if
yes,
you've got any guiding.
To say a few words, that's a very challenging things. And it's very, very important. I mean, at the beginning, you don't have a solution, the solution. You want to make a framework that people can discuss, and all the stakeholders are here. And little by little, you can see that some people will be more important, more dominant than others. Because in this business, you need definitely to have champions. You need some people that can take it to another level. And at the beginning, you cannot find them. You need just to find rooms, for example, gender barrier and more people involved. And in the discussion, little by little at the end, you will get in the final solution. But at the beginning, you don't have the full solution. You have people having a framework that people will discuss, bringing problems and so on and so forth. I think it's a problem that we need really to discuss, to come back and forth and to build the solution. But I think at the beginning, you don't have all the right people that you need.
Thanks a lot, Usman. And Michiko and Cecile, have you got any maybe final words on this particular question?
Well, we don't really seek for the solution. That's why we usually spend 10 years for this to tackle some of the issues and start discussing dialogue with a lot of parties engaged. And that's what we are doing, or the knowledge department has been doing, without seeking the solution.
Thanks a lot. Cecile? Have we lost Cecile?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. I don't have additional points. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just I'd love to bring Santosh and Louis in, but we're running up. I've got people telling me we have 5 more minutes, and that's for the closing words by Rachel MacDonald, who's the Deputy Director General at the International Water Management Institute of the CGIAR. So really interesting conversation, lots of questions. This will be made available, a video recording of this event with the questions that we'll try to come back to afterwards, and we'll be sharing the link with the people who are invited. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, James. And what a fascinating set of both ideas in innovation, but also a framing and salutary thinking around how we can convert innovation into impact. So it's been a great pleasure for me to be here and hear firsthand what are these exciting innovations and how they can contribute to the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, AIM. And it's encouraging to hear how rapidly AIM for Climate is raising global ambition and highlighting and driving these innovations for transformative climate action in many countries. And we would like to thank and mention Anne Vaughan and Jamie Adams in this context. Rob opened up our conversation, the US being an important partner in the AIM for Climate, and he highlighted climate leadership and many of the new strategies, whether it's the climate strategy, the food strategy, but also will be the upcoming water strategy that are critical for climate change adaptation, and gave us some real insight on what is needed for innovation. The other critical partner, the United Arab Emirates, they are of course known for being so innovative in their own country and region. The Museum of Future is hosted in the museum in Dubai. And we also hear the many innovations they are championing in the growing of food in what is a very water scarce region. So we can understand why the UAE is involved. And some of the critical words, those wonderful adjectives that we were hearing about, was about excite and innovate and mitigate and building partnerships and mobilizing investment and of course context. These were critical thinkings across all the various discussions and contributions we've had today. What we know is climate change is not enough. Just climate action is the types of climate action it's innovation not only in technologies, but in policy making and decisions and data. And we've been hearing a lot about that today. And of course, these need to go hand in hand with protecting the environment, diversity and inclusion, gender equality, because we know those are as much critical parts of agriculture and food innovations as what happens on the farm. We heard from our CGIAR scientists and this whole new portfolio of the 32 initiatives that are aiming to innovate from genetic scale through to on-farm innovation through to systems transformation. Those are all different scales demanding different types of innovation. And we heard some ideas from them. Anna Maria started off with Klimber, and she was looking at the various domains of those systems transformation and how we need to look at social equity, environmental quality and protection, as well as technical aspects. One of the areas of innovation were about financial risk instruments. This is how we can begin to think about offsetting the impacts and adapt to those increasing climate extremes and climate variability, and how we need to bring gender and literacy and making sure those insurance products are not only bundled, but are inclusive, and the data science and innovation that goes behind them. Maha took us to the Middle East, North Africa and Central Asia, which for many people capture some of the most awful impacts of climate change, the increasing water scarcity, the increasing droughts that are come at the time of, these are some of the most fragile governments. We have geopolitical challenges in there. And the various work packages she described look at about how genetic innovations are linked there with water technologies, but also policies and investment and engagement with co-developing with stakeholders, because it really is an important context. It's a nuanced context to ensure that those innovations bring impact. Santosh then highlighted how if we want to support food and nutrition systems, we often have to think outside them. He talked about water and energy and environments and that critical context again, talking about glacial meltwaters, about water availability and access, and how these are political issues as much as they are resource mobilization issues, and some of those national security challenges that come from droughts and floods, which are in the end water issues. Polly really brought us in to think about livestock. In many people's minds, livestock is about climate mitigation. We hear about methane emissions from livestock. But she also talked about if we want to capture the full potential of looking at livestock, livestock can offer solutions to both the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, but also are important in building resilience to climate risk and future change. And we need those type of innovations bundled together around that. In many regions, the important area of livestock. Lou then took us to look at low greenhouse gas emission food system development, and framing this around the Paris Agreement. What can we do? And those different areas of innovation that he described to be able to deliver through food systems, through food, land and water systems, I should say, that development, but not at the cost of increased greenhouse gas emissions, and being able to manage climate mitigation as well as adaptation in our work. So we have this portfolio of 32 initiatives, genetics programs, on-farm, fishery practices and developments, and systems transformation that have been developed by the CGIAR in close partnership with many stakeholders on the ground, as well as the donors that are looking to fund them. We then had a great insight from our panelists. Michiko talked about this seeds and the importance, if we want scaling, to have means of disseminating seeds, so that regional trade initiative around seeds by those climate resilient rice varieties, and the whole push in the Asian region about sustainable livestock in the Mekong and beyond, animal health issues. Regional cooperation, regional knowledge sharing were critical parts of all of that. And she also talked about the upscaling of investments. We know that whatever happens in research projects, we have to have a very clear line of sight to impact. It's not just about the 10,000, it's about the 500,000, it's about the million, it's about the 500 million. And what do we need to do as we're designing those innovations to be able to make that? So we know it's about having co-development, about investment, about looking at where and who will be able to take it forward. So public sector constraints, but also the possibilities of working from with the private sector in that. So thank you, Michiko, that was wonderful. Osman, you really brought to life the challenges of really embedded information systems. We hear a lot about climate information systems, and you highlighted the areas of local level success, more demand driven, less supply driven, what we need to do to take it to large scale, what is needed for that. And then those key elements that we need to take into climate, into the design of them. You talked about it's better to have a framework than a finalized system. So having that framework and then working with stakeholders in countries, whether it's at the local scale, at the national scale, or to the regional scale, by bringing that local context and this understanding of how people access knowledge, how people use, and how we can make it financially sustainable. That's where we really do get that scale for those climate information systems. As Sushil, you reminded us about water demand and crops and the importance of water stress. You highlighted how climate adaptation is often about water resource management to manage food and land systems as well. Too much water, too little water, and having water at the right time for crops is important, but also when it's not going to be there, being able to forecast and speak to farmers and water managers so they can take appropriate steps. You talked about early action and early finance, and so we can link this back to a number of the initiatives, whether it's the CGIAR initiative or the CGIAR initiative. That was a lot about forecasting and observatories to be able to support that. So we mentioned that. And Sushil, you also talked about innovation design so that marginal communities can benefit. We heard about that in the CGIAR initiative, but that runs through many of the areas we wanted to. Innovation was so when we think about innovation, it really is important we just don't think about a particular technology, whether it's a data technology or a seed technology. We also had a fascinating conversation about innovation in communication, innovation in technology transfer, and in capacity development and knowledge management, and how multi-stakeholder platforms are at the heart of this. So in drawing to conclusions, I think we had a fascinating conversation. Heather, your question about understanding power relations highlighted that for innovation, it needs to be multi-scalar. It needs to be very much embedded in a local context. And I really want to congratulate the Agriculture Innovation Mission for climate success that they've had to date, but also big success in taking these ambitious targets for doubling in investment to COP27 and beyond, because we know COP27 in Egypt and then COP28 in the UAE, these are countries, but also are convening COPs that can really mobilize those transformations in food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. Back to you, James.
Thanks a lot, Rachel. I'm seeing a lot messages coming in on the chat as well about what we could have mentioned and what could have been mentioned. There's never enough time for these conversations. It was a great conversation. I'd like to thank our presenters. I'd like to thank our panel. I'd like to thank our supporters. And most of all, I'd like to thank the people who came today. And just to remind you again that we will be sending out the recording of this so you can watch it again if there are parts that you maybe missed. Thank you very much. And I'd say thank you and good day, good evening, and good night to everybody.